Hello, welcome back to the Hidden Center, where we wrestle with monsters, lions, and men. I'm your host, Dennis Damone, a lover of wisdom, words, and wonders. This is the third video in a four-part series on Socrates and Socratic philosophy. You've probably been hearing the name Socrates thrown around in YouTube space for a while now, and you might be just wondering, who is this Socrates and what is Socratic philosophy? Well, if you want to know who Socrates is, I did a long video, probably too long, on the cultural context that surrounds Socrates, and another video on his own life and the stories that filled people with awe as those stories were repeated and repeated for 25 generations down to our own day. 25? No, 100. 100 generations. It's been 100 generations since Socrates, and each one of those generations has said to the next, this is something worth paying attention to. So if you want to learn about Socrates the man and the culture that he came from, watch the two previous videos, but now we're turning our attention to Socratic philosophy. We'll have two videos here, one on Socrates' philosophic claims, the truths that he thought central to his teaching, and Socrates' practices, the way that he lived and the way that we can live too. Now, talking about the claims of Socratic philosophy is perhaps a bit of an arrogant endeavor. I'm sorry, guys, but people have been debating just what Socrates taught for 2,400 years, basically since his death. Part of this is because he was hesitant to speak frankly about what he thought. The other part is that he never wrote anything down himself. He was kind of suspicious of writing, best we can tell, and so our only access to him is from what other people said about him. I think, though, that we have good reason to trust that the people who wrote about Socrates really communicated something of what it was like to be around him. It's just unescapably the case that this was a real personality. Real people are messy and complicated. There's an inner unity to their actions, but they're always surprising you at the same time. Socrates, as he's presented to us in the stories of Plato and Xenophon, is like that. And so I think we have good reason to believe that Plato, while he does claim to fuzz the details a little bit, to take Socrates and make him nobler and more beautiful, I don't think that thereby means that he was being dishonest. And so we can look at what Plato presents as Socratic philosophy and see if there is a center around which that Socratic philosophy orbits. I think there is. I think there were 5 central claims that are made regularly throughout the dialogues of Plato in the mouth of Socrates that reveal the basics of what Socratic philosophy entailed. The first thing that Socrates taught, and we see this especially in the Phaedo, is that the world is not reducible to the things that it's made out of. Now, is this true? Is it the case that the world is more than just stuff, more than just material, more than just atoms in the void? I think there's a strong argument to be made that Socrates was right in this claim. The best version of it is given by Jonathan Pageau, as far as I can tell. Suppose someone says to you that a hand is nothing but bones and fat and muscle. Nothing but. It's reducible to. There's nothing more to a hand than being that material. Well, let's take that person at their word. What then is a bone? Well, a bone is nothing other than calcium and a few other minerals. Okay. What then is calcium? Well, calcium is nothing but a bunch of molecules. Okay, what's a molecule? A molecule is nothing but a bunch of atoms. Okay, what are atoms? Well, atoms are nothing but fundamental particles. Okay, what are fundamental particles? Fundamental particles are nothing but, you see how this goes on and on to absurdity. But what's been missed in this whole conversation is that the whole time we were still talking about a hand. A hand. And when you look at it, is different than the world that surrounds it. It's an inescapable fact of our experience that if you look at a hand, it stands out from the horizon that surrounds it. But it's also connected to something else. It's connected to a body. A hand that's separated from a body isn't really a fully functioning hand. And that is an important word there, functioning. It seems that there's something that a hand is for, that a hand does, and that makes it a certain kind of thing. We can't escape the fact that hands act in particular ways. And so at each frame of reference, as we were going from the hand down to the bone, and from the bone down to the calcium, and from the calcium down to the molecules and the atoms and the fundamental particles, they were still the fundamental particles of, the atoms of, the calcium of, the muscles and bones of a hand. Think about what would happen if we started to deny that those body parts had a kind of reality at their own reference point. Suppose that eyes, for instance, were nothing but tissue and a lens. Well, then the lens is nothing but molecules. The molecules are nothing but atoms again and again and again. But molecules, as such, can't see. So if eyes are nothing but molecules, how do they see? There's a hole there that's not reducible to the parts. If you start reducing the eye to mere parts, then you reach a point very quickly at which sight becomes unexplainable. But it was by sight that we discovered what the eye was made out of. Same thing with the hand. We discovered molecules and atoms and calcium and fundamental particles by manipulating tools with our hands. The higher level reality has to be assumed in order to discover the lower level reality. And so I think there's good reason to think that Socrates' claim, the central claim that the world is not reducible to what it's made out of, was true. Now, isn't that interesting? We just gave a very strong and perhaps even gripping argument for a truth claim that Socrates made 2,400 years ago. Maybe his ideas are still relevant. The other claim that I think is central to Socratic philosophy is what I'm going to call ethical absolutism. This is the idea that there is no circumstances whatsoever in which it is profitable to do injustice. Now, that's a radical claim. Suppose you see a bank robber leaving a bank and there is cash floating away from the bags that he is carrying off. That cash lands in front of you. Now, you know that the right thing to do would be to pick that money up and take it to the bank teller, but what harm is it in putting that money in your pocket? Well, Socrates would respond that the moment that you steal that money, even though it's convenient, even though it doesn't seem like you're really harming anyone else, you in fact harm yourself. You see, a human being has many different kinds of desires. We desire things that are noble and good for their own sake, and we desire pleasure and the money that will get us that pleasure. When you decide to pick up that piece of money that was floating in the breeze, you're saying to yourself, and you're training yourself to act as though your desire for pleasure, your desire for money, is better than your desire for noble and great things. But can a man live without noble and great things? Can we live without beauty? If we start trying to turn sunsets into sellable commodities, I think we're beginning to lose our humanity. And so that's just one example, and this claim is difficult to prove, but I think there's good evidence that Socrates' claim that doing that which is wrong is never profitable has some teeth to it, could just maybe be true. So all this talk about doing what is good and realizing that our actions aren't reducible to mere atoms in the void, well, it raises the question, what is acting for? What are these noble things that Socrates is appealing to? And here's one of the interesting things about Socrates. He thinks that we should be reserved about talking about the things that are highest. This claim is made most forcefully and most clearly not by Socrates, but by his student Plato in what's called his seventh letter. In that letter, Plato makes the argument that it would be foolish to ever write down what he believes about God or goodness or the highest and noblest things that we can encounter in life. Because writing things down, talking about them publicly, doesn't usually lead to understanding. Now, this isn't always the case, and perhaps Socrates went too far, but I think we can see that when we talk about things publicly all the time, we cheapen them. Think about the way that the word God is thrown around in modern political discourse. Every politician wants to claim the authority of Christianity behind their proposal, never mind that each new proposal not only contradicts all the other biblically inspired proposals, but they even contradict the own speaker who was saying just the opposite thing not 2 years ago. This cheapens the truth, and it makes it not really clear what we're talking about. Socrates seemed to think that truth, that knowledge, only really happened when a teacher and a student worked together for a long time, rubbing together like two sticks until something sparked. Have you ever had that moment of insight, that moment of wonder in a conversation where all of a sudden things make sense? That was the kind of experience that Socrates seemed to think was central for human life. That without that experience, we're never really going to come to any significant knowledge. And this brings us to the fourth central Socratic claim. We've gone over 3 so far: the world's not reducible to mere stuff, ethical absolutism, and reserve about the highest truths. And this brings us to the great life, the good life. What makes life worth living? Socrates thought, believed, and acted out the proposition that the greatest life is the life spent seeking after noble truths with friends, seeking to love friends in community through conversation and dialogue. Have you ever had a conversation that lasted way into the night? There's something about a conversation after midnight that just takes on a certain weight and power. Have you ever asked your dad or your mom if they were happy or what makes for a happy life? Have you ever asked your pastor whether or not God actually exists or if we can even know? These are the kinds of questions that grip us as human beings, and yet we so frequently dismiss them. If you walked into work and started asking your friends, what is beauty and why does it matter? You'd be looked at like a weirdo. I know, because I've tried. And yet, Socrates did this all the time. He didn't mind seeming like a weirdo because he thought, he sincerely believed, and he was willing to die for the belief that this life in conversation, seeking the noblest truths, was the happiest possible life. Was he right? Could he have been? There are so many kinds of life on offer to us. There's the influencer life, there's the business life, there's the small town worker life, there's blue collar, there's white collar, there's academic life, which is not the same as Socrates' philosophy. They're related, but they're not the same. All these lives are on offer, and we're asked from a young age, what do you want to be? Do you want to be a firefighter? Do you want to be a doctor? Do you want to be a lawyer? The option of being a Socratic philosopher is never made. Is it possible that we're missing out on the happiest life because we don't consider the Socratic life? So this is what Socrates did. He spent his life seeking to know the truth about the highest reality. Now that begs the question, what is the highest reality? Now, we should know already that Socrates is going to be reticent to state it clearly. He's not going to come out and say it, and I'm not sure if I'm going to come out and say it either. But when pressed, And this is the fifth central claim of Socratic philosophy, as far as I can tell. You can see it in the Republic. You can see it in the Parmenides. You can see it in the Timaeus. Socrates claimed that goodness itself, he would say, is the cause of knowledge and truth and of being itself, and that it exceeds all three of these things in beauty and power, and that the study of it is the greatest possible study. Now, these are great and shocking claims. What is this goodness that Socrates could be referring to that could be the cause of knowledge? Can goodness be the cause of knowledge? Well, there are modern arguments being made that make this claim more plausible. Jordan Peterson, whatever you think of his political views, he's an interesting psychologist and philosopher, and he's pointed out that the mere act of vision requires a value judgment, a value hierarchy. When you look out at the world, you don't pay attention to the dust mote in the corner of the room. You focus on something that is most important in what you're looking at. That's a claim about goodness. And so goodness guides our vision. It's a cause of knowledge. And what is it when you know a thing? When you know that 2 + 2 = 4, you know, and that knowledge completes you. It is good for you. Your mind is the kind of thing that is satisfied by truth. And what is it like to know other things, objects, like a hammer? Well, I think you only really know a hammer when you know what it's for, what its goal is. The same with a seed. You wouldn't know a seed unless you knew it was pointing at a tree. You wouldn't know a baby unless you knew it was pointing at an adult or a sage. It's by knowing what a thing points at, what it's good for, what the goodness that it seeks is, that we know what they are. And so goodness is intrinsic to, it seems, every aspect of our knowledge, to our relevance, to relevance realization, to questioning, and to understanding itself. Okay, so there's some meat to this idea that goodness is the cause of knowledge. Can it be the cause of truth? Well, that gets even more obscure. Pontius Pilate asks Jesus, "What is truth?" Do you know what truth is? Have you been able to find it? Have you noticed that you seek it? And when you arrive at it, I don't know about you, but I'm grateful, almost as if it were a gift, something generous. It's a strange idea that goodness could be the cause of truth, but maybe there's some meaning to it? What about goodness as the cause of being? Now, at this, like Socrates, I'm not sure I'm willing to divulge the opinions I now have about goodness in its relation to reality. But just like truth, we might point out, in our happiest moments, when we look out at the world and find it beautiful, we are grateful, almost as if it's a gift from something, a gift from some good that surpasses anything we might know. If there is a good like that out there, then like Socrates, I want to spend my life pursuing it. It's reasonable to suspect that there might be such a good, given that the world is not, as we established earlier, reducible to mere stuff. Mere stuff isn't good in itself. Mere material isn't. But perhaps higher level realities could be good in themselves. It makes sense with the ethical absolutism that we started talking about earlier, that there are some things that you shouldn't do and that there's no profit in doing that which is wrong. Quite a bold claim, and yet it makes sense in light of the nobility of the good, so does Socrates' reticence to speak about the good. This is a mysterious thing, and every attempt to describe it seems to make it all the more obscure. It's no surprise that Socrates was unwilling to talk directly about the truth when the truth was so difficult to understand, when it had such a noble cause. It also, this principle of the good, explains the fourth claim. If there really is a good that surpasses all other goods, and there's good reason to think that there might be, consider again the argument of Jordan Peterson that in every particular good we're seeking a higher good, and that ultimately we must arrive at some good that is the greatest of all goods that inspires our search of every particular good. It's a good argument. We'll put a link in the description where you can go find it. So it's at least reasonable to think that there might be such a thing, and we need to know it. And it's best to not know such things alone. So if there is such a good, it would make sense of that fourth claim of Socrates, that philosophy, the life lived in pursuit of knowledge of the good with friends, is the best possible life. Which would inspire us to ask, how could we live it? How did Socrates live this noblest life that he described? Well, that's the question of our next video. What are the practices of Socratic philosophy? I hope you'll join us in that next video, but for now, thank you for your time and attention.